So you've now had the introduction to me. I'm now going to introduce you to the Gaia Group and how we work. We are first and foremost an architectural practice, and our practice covers the territories of community architecture and ecological design. In order to be able to fulfill this agenda, which we've now been working on for 30 years, we had to set up a research group because we found that when we were innovating, the architectural fees weren't sufficient to be able to cover researching properly new materials, new techniques and so on. So for the past 18 years we've had Gaia Research as well as Gaia Architecture, and the focus of all of this is innovation, which is really our core business. We innovate in order to improve the quality of the Scottish and actually Northern European architectural infrastructure. Now, I'm going to come on to my basic thesis, which is this first lecture is really about sustainability, the bigger picture, and the second one will come down to the technical aspects. And my thesis is that sustainability actually covers everything. Everything we do at the moment in our relationship with our planet, which is unsustainable, needs to be addressed, and we need to live in a more balanced life with the planet. We look at 6 headings which fit, as you'll see later, into the 3 primary headings, and these cover population health, pollution, agriculture, resources and industrial growth. Now what's happened is there's tend to be a bit of a funnel vision. We all know these are the issues, but actually what's happened is it's got dumbed down. So instead of looking at all of this agenda, the focus has been on stuff you can touch and feel, which is resources, and stuff that ends up as being the part of the consumer industry. So we focus on materials, water, land, etc., but mostly because we are an energy-hungry generation, we have looked at energy, and even more stupid, we've looked at just carbon and carbon accounting. And the theory is that somehow or other, if we can find pieces of consumer kit, eco-bling I call it, or the silver bullet that will solve the carbon problem, then suddenly with one leap we're all freed. However, what we have here is a very sophisticated, complex challenge, and what we've done as a market response is dumb. So here we are thinking that with one leap we can all be free and the world is safe for posterity, and actually it's a bit more complicated than that. Now first of all, let's get the energy issue out of the way, because that's really simple. There's nothing simpler than solving energy issues. It's absolutely, believe me, after 30 years of doing very little else, so simple. It's not rocket science. But eco-bling doesn't solve fuel poverty. It actually adds to it. So we're not addressing the real issues by thinking yet more consumerism is going to actually somehow deliver energy efficiency. Insulation and draft proofing will, certainly in Northern Europe. Obviously within other climates we have cooling loads and air conditioning to address, but that can also be done by designing buildings appropriately and not making them things that heat up and overheat. We have to beware of the carpetbaggers selling the snake oil remedies into the market, saying this will turn the sun down, this will give you energy for free and so on and so forth. We really know much more better than that now. Cavity filling in Northern Europe makes for damp walls. In 1935 we decided we were going to build walls out of cavities so that the water didn't get through into the house, and so it had a barrier and helped with the insulation. If we start filling these up again, then we get damp walls. So we shouldn't be going there. And of course, once we look at energy efficient houses, where we're increasing the airtightness and we're increasing the insulation, we need to make sure that we have a health check. And that's all that needs to be said. Energy saving is simple. Now, in terms of sustainability and its definition, I come back to these first criteria. The three-legged stool of sustainability, we're all used to these phrases, community, economy and the environment. But actually, if you go back 100 years, Patrick Geddes was already talking about folk, work and place. And I think this is quite a neat way of actually doing the accounting for looking at projects to see whether they are working. What people tend to forget is that you need the links between these to make it work. It's about the interaction of these. So when you have a place, you need to look at how it works. When you are working with it, you need to know how it engages the community. And when the community are engaged, they interact back again on the place. And this virtuous circle should keep rotating so that the whole of the agenda is brought in and we can deliver sustainability as a process. And I mean as a process that, for example, as an architect, I can deliver you a green building on Tuesday, but actually, if I don't also deliver the process whereby you're going to be looking after this product, then actually by Thursday you can have trashed the whole thing. And it's with anything that is a product, it can very quickly actually become an unusable product. So when you're doing sustainable development, it's very important that the process, the way it's procured and the way it is completed and the way it's looked after is actually taken on board as part of the comprehensive approach. You will already be familiar with the value map that Chris Butters has been working on for many years now. And in fact, a lot of the accounting systems we use in our projects back into this, and I'll show you some of these later. The Sustainable Development Value Map, of course, as you are aware from Chris, covers economy, ecology and society. And just to make the point about how small within all this the carbon accounting is, it's a subsystem of a subsystem. And if we just only focus on this, we really are going to miss the point and we will not save the planet. I started this game in the early 70s, and it was very clear to me that I had read all the global analysis and was suitably impressed that something needed to be done. But all I was able to do was to get out and start making things with my hands or changing my own house or trying to change the way in which I worked. And really, for such a huge challenge, it's really not enough just to go out and start building solar collectors and wind turbines. It's really something where we have to intervene where our political lives are and where our community lives are. So working in a bioregional level is actually fundamentally important to getting things done where everybody's involved. And I think if we start focusing on eco-houses, eco-villages, then we miss the point. What we need is an eco-planet. And that's only going to be delivered by everybody getting together in eco-cities and an eco-world. So, we need to cover all aspects, and we need to do it through all the scales, from global to microscopic. And only by working that way are we going to be able to reach a resolution where we live in harmony with our own planet. And the talks that I usually do for the Oslo event go into Work Folk Place, and the first two I'm going to do here will be first of all on the community side. I'm going to talk about a project where I was with my family for 20 years nearly in the Highlands of Scotland. I moved there because it was a project where, as an academic in Hull, I was working with students to assist the initiative of local doctors, professionals and businessmen in this valley of 3,500 people who were very serious about taking community initiatives in order to make sure that their local economy could survive. And I'm going to show you what was done in a partnership between those of us who moved there from outside and the people from inside. As you see, the population declined rapidly from a very vibrant small farm-based, what's called crofting in Scotland, community from the 1800s and 1900s, through to where it declined to about 3,500 people in the late 20th century. By the time we got there, it was really down to 3,500. And you'll see through this initiative, it's actually gradually built its way back up to a point now where it's starting to be quite vibrant and a very, very popular community for people to move to. I'm going to look at this through the three elements of Work Folk Place: starting with these 4 projects. The first was to do with what was already happening there, which was sheep farming, which was not viable. There was a situation where they weren't getting enough money for their sheep, and some farmers were just simply burying them in the ground rather than send them to market because it was the cheapest thing to do. What they then did is get themselves together as a food co-op, and they grouped together as a cooperative of farmers in order to be able to sell direct to the market. They commanded enough sheep, 20,000 sheep, to be able to go to make a deal with the slaughterhouse, and then they also marketed direct to shops such as Harrods in London as the Highland Glen Marketing Co-op. This meant by cutting out the middlemen, they reduced their costs and were able to sell lamb into the market at a reasonable price. Strengthened by this knowledge, they then decided they would look into growing vegetables and soft fruit in an area that was a good alluvial plain but hadn't been used for that purpose for many years, and they decided they would look at the possibility of growing cabbages, winter vegetables, and crops such as raspberries. This was extremely successful, and eventually it grew outside the area into the whole of the region. And these farmer co-ops were really quite an important initiative in order to make the farming infrastructure of this area viable. In terms of forestry, about 17% of Scotland is now forested, and so the associated machinery for harvesting on these steep hills has had to be developed, and locally an inventor decided to look at what was called a winch system for winching logs down the hill. They would put a guy rope on a tree at the top of the hill, and where it was too steep for tractors or even sometimes for horses, they would actually cut the logs and then winch them down to the bottom. And it's this winching machine that actually started to develop what was called the Timber Master, and it's sold all over the world. It was made by experts within the Upper Tay Valley, and it's quite important because they did have invitations to go to Coventry and various centres of engineering, but they decided rather than moving the machinery to the expertise, they would move the expertise to the machinery. Very important local initiative, and it meant that we had very skilled people in a rural environment, which is good for the community profile. We also had, of course, local arts and crafts people, and the local doctor bought a local shop, and within that he made space available for those who were local, i.e. living in the valley and making pots and weaving and art and textiles. And through having this joint shop, they were able then to get on and do their weaving and pottery and so on without having people coming in to interrupt them. And they were able to sell from a central focal point in the main street. So a good initiative all round. And again, this was an arts and crafts co-op. So through these cooperatives, a lot of benefit was being added locally, and a lot of focus was coming into this area as being having interesting initiatives. Now, if we move on to the folk element, there was a lot of work happening in the area that was to do with raising the profile of the self-belief of the community, and we did this by making sure that projects were fully endorsed and embraced by the community as a whole. Various techniques were used, but let's start with the conservation project. This is the Heartwood project. Now, it just so happens that Aberfeldy is right in the geographical heart of Scotland. If you draw two lines between the four corners of Scotland, it crosses in an area just above Aberfeldy, which is the main town of the Upper Tay Valley. And there, 150 years ago, a landowner planted a 10-acre, that's a 4-hectare, forest in the shape of a heart. And we discovered that heart-shaped wall around the forest, but by then some trees had fallen and some had grown off the edge. And so the heart shape was not clear. And it was our initiative, and we got funding from a conservation tree planting body to replant the heartwood as a very symbolic way of getting an icon for this area of Scotland, as the heartland of Scotland. And in the picture you see the head teacher from the school and some of the primary 7 pupils planting trees paid for by a grant from a conservation body. Now that has grown up. This picture was taken in 1983, and that is now a fully fledged heartwood forest. Meanwhile, we were also looking to try and have a major recreation centre there. When I moved there in 1979, I realised as an architect I could possibly help them to get this recreation centre. And I joined the team, and we took 3 years to get the money together. But we did it by actually making sure that it was quite clear to all the funders that the community were fully engaged in this project. And we did this by having a series of workshops with people of up to 100 people attending, but always working in small groups, say 6 to 8 around a table, working on an agenda where, if you look at this sheet, you'll see it's like a Chinese menu. It has all of the things that they might want to have in a recreation centre, but actually it is a wish list. It's not necessarily realistic. And to make it realistic, what we did was we actually had the cost of each of these facilities per square metre, the area that was likely to be needed, say the difference between a small swimming pool and a large swimming pool, or a small sports hall and a large one. And then the third row has those two put together, so we know how much each facility is going to cost. And importantly, in the final row, what we have is what that facility will make as a profit or a loss each year. So the groups go out and they have a shot at this, and they go and choose from the Chinese menu which of the courses they want to eat, and they put those down, and we add them up at the bottom of the sheet. So the blue line tells you what the cost of these facilities were, and the purple line on the right hand side tells you what the profit or loss would be. If they're not happy with what they've come up with as a group, they can go back and have another go. At the back of the room we have a computer and a printout, and they can keep going for as long as they want. But normally these meetings last about an hour and a half, and the people getting involved in this project know both the value in terms of capital cost, but also the profit and loss in terms of how much this will win or lose each year. So they come up with a fairly realistic view of what they think they can achieve as a community, and that goes down well with potential funders because they realise these guys are realistic and know what they want to get, and know that they're not going to try and get themselves into a difficult funding situation in the future. From the final sheet that they give us, we as the professionals can work together with experts in costing, and we can actually do a 5-year projection for how this project will work against an inflation model and against a loan profile. And we can look at the costs and the benefits on both sides of the spreadsheet. And we can then put that into a feasibility study. And we did this with this project, and we achieved 100% funding for a project worth about £1 million at the time. And we built it within 2 years, and it became, again, an exemplar of how this sort of project could happen in a rural community in the middle of rural Scotland. There were about another 20 projects we got involved in after this, and it really broke the mould in how to do self-help community building. Strengthened by the initiative into the recreation area, we were joined on this project by somebody with a journalistic background who decided to launch a community magazine. It had been tried 2 or 3 times before and failed, but because of the professionalism of this particular person, it was very successful. It was again a cooperative model, and all the decisions were made by a community group. It did have an editor who had the right to edit, but it was very much a cooperative event. Now, because this started in 1980 and it's been running now, still running very successfully here in 2012, about halfway through that process, they were confident that they could actually launch what happened to be Scotland's first ever community radio. The legislation was coming in place in the early 80s, and the late 80s and the early 90s, to allow communities to form their own radio stations. And the very first of these was Heartland Radio, the heart again coming into this, and it was put together by people who had successfully launched this magazine. So we had then something that was overarching and covering the community as a shared experience through the media. and it now runs round the clock, 24/7, 365 days a year. And finally, within this area, we have an archaeological reconstruction. Again, part of the ancient history of this area is that it used to have settlements on the loch. Nobody's quite sure why, whether it was a plague of snakes or whether it was for defence or whatever. But they had these settlements that were sitting in the water a few hundred metres out from the shore. And these are called crannogs, and they were the first sub-aqua archaeology to happen in the UK. That means that people were going down with scuba gear in order to be able to look at these ancient sites. And there was a decision made 10 years after this archaeological research to try and build a reconstruction of a crannog. And that's been done, and it now is a visitor experience up in this area. So you can see that by doing this sort of activity, it's embedding what is actually a 4,500-year-old settlement into the context of the modern day, and actually letting people see the importance of the history of the area they live in. And carrying on with this theme of place, I'll go through some other projects. Perhaps one of the most important symbolic ones is the meal mill. The oats crop is one of the fundamentals of the Scottish diet, and it was a very healthy diet until actually the oats were replaced by processed North American wheat. And the Scots diet now, unfortunately, because they don't eat as much porridge or oatmeal as they used to, are actually in a very bad dietary situation with too much sugar and refined flour. But this is a symbol of the old oatmeal tradition, and it's water-powered, and it has been working for nearly 300 years. Ever since it was built, they've never stopped the water wheel turning and grinding oats, and it's still there to see today. It's also a very fine art gallery and an extremely fine coffee bar. So these buildings can be recycled to very modern purposes. This particular building is something, again, of iconic importance in Scotland, because it was one of the people who was in the team designing this was a very junior clerk called Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who is now known as a world-famous pioneer of modern architecture. I was lucky enough to be involved in converting this in the village of Fortingall. Also, the group that we were involved in, called Locus, that's local focus, and it comes together as a Latin word meaning place, by then had a reputation for being able to engender these initiatives and these cooperatives. And this church in the middle of the town square became vacant because the people worshipping there had got down to about 3 or 4, and it was decided to dispose of the building and that they would go and worship elsewhere. And they offered this to us because we were a community group for £1. Now, very important to our group, because that meant we had an asset worth nearly £100,000 against which we could start to do things, because we had a secure asset, and we weren't just a body with no backup. And you'll see from this that we managed to completely refurbish the interior with an exhibition and various things, but also, importantly, it was the hub of the overground trail. We did actually get a thing called the Scottish Oscar for tourism in 1992 from a Scottish Tourist Board because of this initiative that was actually showing not just classic tourist sites, but actually a working community with working farms and potteries and so on and so forth, where there was an interaction between the people visiting the area and a respect for the rural activities happening in the area. So there we are, and that all led to a very vibrant sense of rising sap in the community, and people such as the very famous J.K. Rowling and various others have come up to live in this area because it's got this terrific sense of life going about it. So I'm showing that because it's something I personally lived in and was terribly involved in for 20 years. And I can tell you now that you don't wait for somebody else to do stuff. You have to just get on and do it yourself. That's the way it happens. And that's the way this happened. People just got off their backsides and went and made it happen. Meanwhile, and this overlaps with the previous project, I was also working in an urban area in the city of Perth in Scotland, and I was working on a project actually for industrial development, but next door to the industrial development we were trying to do for an organisation called the Scottish Development Agency was this very, very derelict housing area. And it was so bad, and it had such a bad reputation that it meant that the people who wanted to develop the industrial units were just not interested. So we then set about looking at how we could actually turn this community round. And you see at the bottom picture on the right there, about 30 completely derelict units. And above it you see 6 years later, after the various initiatives, that we now have, instead of being completely empty, completely full of families and vibrant. Now this is only part of a much bigger project. You see the site plan on the left, and here are many of the images from what's happened over the last 21 years through 9 phases of development. It took the first 6 years in order to be able to get the finances and the organisation together to make it happen, throughout which we weren't paid all the time. There were years when we actually worked voluntarily. But at the end, it was to our benefit because the community stuck with us as we'd stuck with the community, and there's been a great degree of loyalty. And what happens is, when you work with people over a number of years, you can achieve things that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily achieve because you have a sense of trust between the architect and the community. The story of this project goes way back to 1935 when it was an award winner, and it was in the purple patch there at the beginning. It was a really well sought after scheme. But once the Second World War completed, it started to decline, and it went downhill until about 1970s when the local authority, the municipality, decided in their wisdom that they weren't happy with the unkept gardens around the houses, and they just simply bulldozed them down. And that included 2 gardens that had won Garden of the Year in the city in the early 80s. Sorry, in the early 70s. Now, had the dotted line there, it shows that had they intervened properly in 1970, they could have kept this above the pink line there, which is what you might call the minimum standard. But because they didn't, the whole place became a totally blighted community, and by the time we came in 1982-83, it was absolutely on its uppers, and people were saying things like, the only answer to that is to blow it up, and you might include some of the people in there. To their shame, people were saying awful things about not just the bad condition of the property, but they were also talking about the fact that these people had no hope. And we now know that actually all they needed was hope. And we took them in the early 80s and through to 89 when we first started on site to see co-ops in Liverpool and other parts of Britain. Now, if you look at the social performance indicators, even as late as 1987, and we'd already been involved for 4 years, the population was a mere 936 in 450 houses with a waiting list of 200 families trying to move out. This was not a healthy situation. Unemployment was 80%, crime was 2% of the whole of that area. That's 936 people responsible for 2% of the crime in a huge area of Scotland. Empty flats 33%, transfer requests 75%, and so on and so forth. Now we move forwards 13 years to 2000. And by now, we've got the population up to 1,200. Now in 2012, it's actually nearly 2,000, and we have nearly back to 450 houses again. And we have a waiting list of 350 to 400 families wanting to move in. So this is a real shift. And you can see the figures there of unemployment is down, still not dramatically, but not acceptably, but reasonable by comparison with 80%. Crime, empty flats, transfer requests, and so on. And the important thing at the bottom, lots of agencies active in the area so that it stays vibrant. That's the sustainability bit. So we move, if you look at the triple bottoms line in terms of social, economic, and environmental criteria, we move from a three-legged stool that will collapse, and we look at the indicators now with everything growing, and we're thinking again of Chris's value map and scoring all these criteria. And finally, we now have a stool that is sufficient to stand up. So that's why it's really important that we address all 3 issues. We look at the social infrastructure, we start and finish from there. We look at improving the environment, and then that improves the local economy. And in terms of how this was phased, it's quite interesting that when we started, we simply recycled the buildings. Instead of knocking them down and building new, we just recycled them. And that was really the only part of the green agenda that was happening then. By the time we were 2 or 3 years down the line, we were then engaging in conversation with the client group, the co-op. The co-op, by the way, was everybody in this community actually owned their houses jointly, and for a membership of £1, they could be part of a club, and the club then owned all the houses. Nobody owned their houses individually, because at the end of leaving, when they left the area, they went back, their house went back into the club. Now, talking to these people over the period of the next 2 or 3 years, they became very interested in our interest in ecological building. And particularly, we wanted to try and pioneer not poisoning timber in order to try and preserve it from wood rot. And we got in tow with some specialists in order to be able to detail these buildings so that we didn't have to use chemical poisons. The double whammy was that we actually managed to save £12,000 on chemical bills, and the cost of doing the remedial action to keep these buildings properly ventilated was only about £8,000. So it's a situation where an ecological design intervention actually saved money rather than costing it. By the time we got to phase 7, we were able to introduce a lot more of the green agenda, and this particular phase was a sun scoop. It had all the non-toxic treatments, it had breathing walls that dealt with moisture, benign paints for the indoor climate, and dealing with the flooding aspects and the water aspects of the project creatively. If we come to phase 8, what we find is that by now we've got enough confidence among the local residents that they were happy for us to go for a step further from just healthy buildings to low allergy specification. It's never been done in the UK before, and we built these houses specifically to make sure that all of the triggers that trigger allergy and asthma indoors, and in Northern Europe, when you're closing buildings up, you're actually running the risk of off-gassing from toxic materials and actually having too much moisture in the building. And by having moisture-open materials and by having materials that don't off-gas formaldehyde and other chemicals, you're able to make sure the indoor climate stays healthy. But you still also need to look very carefully at the methods of insulation. This project pioneered 3 different ways of dealing with insulation, and we were comparing the 3. Now, finally, just to reinforce the value map, you can look at 1984 and see that this stool was collapsing, and you can look at 1999 and see that actually it had filled up. And over that very short period, we were able to turn this community around. So far from saying, let's demolish the place, let's get rid of the people, instead of displacing the problem to somewhere else, we actually dealt with the problem on location, and it's now a beacon of how to do these things. This is the way in which we scored this. We've got these 6 criteria I introduced to you earlier: supporting communities and creating healthy environments, which is the folk bit, minimising pollution, enhancing biodiversity, which is the place bit, and effective use of resources and managing the process, which is the work bit. And what we've done here is look at a way in which, say we take the last project I showed you, we find that we've got local people given the chance to thrive and be healthy, an environmentally functional but high amenity external landscape, and passive design with low running costs. So what we've done is, when we score that, we find we're scoring really quite highly everywhere, but particularly in the communities segment. So these are the key performance indicators. I won't go through them. You have these as a handout. And under folk, there are a series of criteria we've looked as key performance indicators to make sure that everything's working. When it comes to place, we have other key performance indicators. When it comes to work, that's the local economy thriving. Then also we've got a series of key performance indicators, and these we've measured and these we've put onto the value map. So, for the next generation, we have affordable, healthy, audited and sustained houses at a cost yardstick, cheaper to run, with low allergy and community owned. Now, I want to mention a very important point here, which is through this and all the other projects, you mustn't drop the green baton. Every project on the planet starts with high aspirations in terms of its deep green agenda, and we can all write a brief that says, yeah, we want the best of everything, no matter what the cost, no matter what the effort. In fact, if you'll see from this slide that if you start with a deep green brief and a deep green client, if you then appoint the wrong design team, you can drop the baton straight away. Once the design team get on board and start to talk to contractors, if they get the wrong contractor, they can drop it again. And if those contractors have the wrong subcontractors, it very quickly just becomes an ordinary building. And if you don't then, when you finish the project, hand it over to the client with a proper book of rules as to how it should run, then it won't be sustainable again. And you end up with something that wanted to be very deep green and ended up not green at all. So it's important, therefore, that we look at being involved from the very beginning in writing the brief and making sure it's something that can be achievable to the post-occupancy period. And only then can we keep the baton at a higher level, because once it's dropped, it's very difficult, almost impossible to get it back again. And then we need to look at the post-occupancy period to make sure that we are measuring that we got what we wanted to get. Now, I can tell you that 99% of projects that start with a deep green brief end up with a very undeep green building, and very often, mostly, very disappointed clients. In order to nail this down, we have actually engaged with housing associations and various other organisations in Scotland. This one is in the Gorbals in the south of Glasgow, and it's called Crown Street, and it's what you might call a modern urban development. And they've done it along conventional lines, and they brought us in to try and make sure that the subsequent phases were green. We developed for them a value map system with the 6 criteria that I've talked about earlier, and under each of these criteria we have some drop lists, and these drop lists then are actually scored. On all of these lists you'll see the criteria we're using and then the standard that we're setting. But we've taken it further than that, because this is actually trying to make sure that the standards we set are going to increase throughout time. So on our audit tool we have the basic standard, we then go to an improved standard, we then go to a higher standard, and finally the best practice. And what we're trying to do is to get with each phase that the quality improves. So we start with these lists, and the first 2 areas are the ones I showed you, which are the issue itself and then the level we're trying to reach. So we start with a light green brief, and what happens in the first phase, we let these projects to contractors who we say, we want you to achieve this standard. If you achieve this standard, then we will make available for you to another site so that you can actually then increase the standard up to a darker green. And finally, if you are successful in that, we will give you another site in order to achieve a deep green standard. So the points make prizes. The contractors actually want more land, they want more development, they know if they play by the rules, they'll get it. And we find that a very good mechanism for trying to make sure the contractors stick with the green agenda and don't drop the green baton. And we're now halfway through this process with this housing association in Glasgow. And we're very hopeful that we can reach a good level. This particular project, which is in Edinburgh, in the centre, it's a 250-year-old Georgian building, and we refurbished it for a housing association. And I'm showing you that it's possible to do refurbishment in the same way that we did the new build. If you remember back to the low allergy housing, the 14 houses that I talked about earlier, this is a 250-year-old refurbishment of a Georgian building where we used the same specification to achieve the same sorts of levels. And on the left you can see the various interventions and the specifications that we used. You can see the healthy building strategy, which was avoidance of materials that are toxic and known asthma triggers, and using materials that were healthy and also hygroscopic, which means that they could deal with moisture. So for example, the bathrooms were plastered with clay plaster, which would absorb moisture and give it off at a regular rate, as opposed to creating steam in the bathroom. Finally, I'm going to talk about the Eco-City project, and this is in the context of how difficult it is in the modern world where people are burying their heads in laptops and the web and Facebook, to get people out to actually engage in their community activities. And it's become more and more difficult over the last 20 years. And this is a very exciting project we've been doing since 20 years ago. And it's called the Eco-City project. What we do is we engage with up to 40, sometimes 45 children, aged between 9 and 11, and we asked them to intervene in their own city, in their own hinterland. And we give them a model that's blank of their city, and then we ask them to make choices. And before they do this, we go into the schools and we tell them what we think the project is trying to achieve. But it's very important that all the ideas are theirs, because the power of ideas that have come from children as opposed to adults is extremely strong. We go to the schools and we talk to them about children's rights and their participation and the importance of that in order to engage with adults about environmental issues. We talk about working to scale, because we're talking about very small buildings here. We're not talking about designing houses, we're talking about designing streets. So we talk about urban design, we talk about urban design integrated with ecological design. And these are some of the sorts of things that we introduce to the schools. They can get used to what a street is. We look at that, and then we look at how streets can go to squares, and we look at how squares can actually go to make up cities. And then we can look at bird's eye views of cities in order to show that it really does happen in practice. And it gives them a tool for them to see their own towns. We play games with them where, for instance, this is a simple game where groups of 3 kids are asked to make a little 30 centimetre square model with little blocks on it. And the only rule is that they should link up on the middle of each side. Put all these sheets together, it makes up a city. And you can do that in about 10 minutes. And it gives the kids the confidence of being able to play with free thinking of making streets and squares. And then we can talk about what that looks like, and we can play with it. And this is the group that we used, that were involved in the project for 2010 in a city called Dunfermline in Scotland. And we were asking them to think about some simple questions like, where do these materials and things come from? How are they used in the buildings, and where do they go to? So rather than just thinking about things as coming from shops and so on and so forth, we were challenging to think about the environmental conditions of the things that go to make up buildings in terms of water, materials, energy and ventilation. And we can show you how this could be done in a real model, and the children will actually explain this. I'm going to take you through the process. That's the first input to schools. The second is that we then prepare the model, the venue, we train the team that are going to work with the children. Then we have the event itself over a period of 1 week. And at the end of the week, it's presented to the local adults. And they come and go, ooh, these children are fantastic. We underestimated their capacity for years, and we really should be listening to them. And it's always a fantastic event when we do this final presentation. And in some cases, as here in the city of Halifax in England, an adult workshop took on board what the children have been saying, and on the left are the children's ideas, and on the right are the adult ideas, and the overlap is about 85%. So adults really will take on board concepts from children and take them and value them as important. So there's a huge kind of interaction here between different generations. Enormous outcomes, both on the bottom left, these are the outcomes to the children. On the top and the right are the outcomes to the community. And it's a very powerful tool in terms of developing the profile of an area, gives a shared local vision and so on. So we are very pleased with all the results we've had on this project. And very quickly I'll show you the last one we did, which is, this was all the kids and kids from other schools, from their school, before we presented the model to the adults. So it's laid out properly. We hype it up with music and lights and everything else so that the parents are suitably excited. And then this is the end of a week's work. On day one, we just have these whiteboards, and gradually through the week, the children go from their post-it notes. These are workshops we've done in the schools, and they bring them along and they decide where they're going to put these on their models. Each group has a model 1 metre by 2 metres times 2, so there are 6 children working on 2 boards, and they're all from mixed schools. And then they gradually intervene. As the colour appears on the model, it means they've made decisions. The white is what's happening, what's already there. And you see here a typical group of 6 kids working with the 2 models and deciding what they're going to put onto their model. The white ones are where they've decided to leave buildings, the brown ones are where they're putting new ones, and eventually they'll paint those. The blue is water, the green is fields and so on. And we even have important guests coming in to see what they're doing. This is an ex-Prime Minister from the UK, you may recognise. He came for 20 minutes and stayed for an hour and a half. And here we're getting towards the end of the process, and they're putting the boards together to make sure that all the trams run through and the water runs through and everything's joined up. And then in come the adults. Now at this point, all the adults who've been involved in the project through the week shut up. They don't talk for half an hour, and only the children are allowed to take the visitors around the model and tell them what's happening. So on the Thursday night before this is presented, we go with all the children to make sure they all know what's happening throughout the whole model. And I can tell you on the Friday, the adults are absolutely astonished at how much these 10-year-olds can say about urban design. They're absolutely astonished at their capabilities. So, to finish, what's shared by all of these projects is that we're looking at a mixture of top-down and bottom-up. We're looking on the one hand at getting resources that will allow communities to be able to get some money and some expertise to do what they want to do. But at the same time, the control has to come from below, and that the people from the top down need to respect that without the fundamental activity of a full community, the thing will not be sustainable. I'm going to use one final example, which is this city of Culemborg near Utrecht, where they start with the blocks, and they don't have any gardens or any outside side space. They wait until the 24 families are all in their houses and have joined the project, and then they have a workshop where they decide how the gardens are going to be designed, where the edges are going to be, whether they're going to have walls or fences, whether they're going to merge into a barbecue area, play areas, sand pits, and so on. And they have a professional community landscape architect working with them. They then decide the plan, and they then all get together and build the gardens as a joint exercise. So after a few months, what you have is a completely integrated community of people, of 24 families who've never lived together before, who are completely and utterly working together. A very nice piece of what you might call social glue. So that's my finish point, and I'm just, again, underpinning the importance of the process of the people in any sustainable development. And I'll come back to this. This is my book list, and you'll get a copy of these slides so you can actually peel this off. You can also get it from our website, and I'll show this at the end of session 2. And now I'm opening up this to question and answer. We'll go live on Skype, and I will talk to any questions that come up for the next 20 minutes. Thank you.